YouTube channel after the event. Also, every participant will receive a certificate. Please submit any questions you have in the chat box, and we will answer these at the end of the session. Without further delay, I'm excited to hand over to Ollie, who's going to tell us about feeling confident teaching using a flipped learning model. Thank you, Ollie. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Ollie. So yeah, my name is Ollie Wood, and I'm a teacher and teacher trainer. And I'm here talking to you today about using flipped learning and how to feel more confident, not because it's something new, but because it's something that's become more relevant with COVID-19 lockdowns. So a lot of teachers, one way or another, are having to use this model. So let's find out a little bit more about it and how you can feel more confident using it yourself. So first of all, if you could write in the chat for me what you think you know about blended learning or flipped learning, just like a short definition. Are they the same? Are they different? What do you think? Make it as short as possible, just so I can see what kind of a definition we have. Okay, I can see different. Can anyone tell me a little bit how they might be different? Just in a couple of words. Blended face-to-face and online. I'm glad everyone's got that it's different. That's good. Blended is online and school flipped. Okay, good. Right, I'm happy with that. So let me go on and give you my definition, which is not the only definition, but for me, blended learning is an umbrella term used to describe a way of teaching that combines online resources with in-person instruction. So as a couple of people were saying in the chat there. And this creates a more personalized learning environment. Additionally, with blended learning, teachers can often make some or all of the content available to students outside of class time. So then flipped learning is nothing to do with pancakes. I just liked that picture. In fact, flipped learning or a flipped classroom is a rotational model of blended learning. So this means that students consume all of the traditional input material at home at their own pace, and during class time they complete work assignments that are traditionally given as homework, as well as other activities such as team-based, project-based learning. So that is flipped classroom model, because it literally flips what the students at home and what they do in the classroom. So this brings me to our first and only poll of the session. I'd like to know, have you ever flipped your classroom before? Simple as that. Have you ever flipped your classroom before? It's simple, yes or no. If you could click on the poll now, and we'll give you sort of 20, 30 seconds to do that, so we can get lots of, as much data as we can. So another 10 seconds or so. I can see in the chat it seems to be about 50-50. Okay, Charlie, let's see how we're doing on the poll. Okay, oh wow, it really is 50-50 there then. Wonderful. So let's start nice and slowly then. First of all then, let's have a look at a very basic way of flipping your classroom. So if you've never flipped your classroom before, this is the easiest way to get started, and it's really by using video. We'll talk about where this fits into your lesson shortly. So first of all, internet access. So let's say you're using video. The first challenge to consider is internet access. Do your students have a strong home internet connection? If not, can they use the facilities at school? If the answer to both questions is no, which is sometimes the case, then perhaps think of other ways your students can access video content. But yeah, if we start with video, this is the best place to start if you're not sure where to begin flipping. So choose a topic your students struggle with and show a video that explains this concept. They watch that at home, and then we use the class time to answer their questions, or have them teach each other or tutor small groups of students, things like this. The key to the videos, though, is to make sure they are short and sweet. Anything longer than 10 minutes, say, and your students will stop watching. Another good rule is that 1 or 2 videos are better than 3 or 4 mediocre ones. So quality over quantity. And let's not forget video viewing skills. Don't assume students know how to watch school-related videos. I'm sure they are brilliant at watching short clips on various social media platforms, but watching educational video requires a little skill. So go over with your students how to watch a video. They should first watch the whole video, not taking notes, just watch it, take it in, get the overall meaning, then watch it again, taking notes, and finally a third time adding any information to their notes. Now, I should say here that students don't need to watch videos. Flipped learning does not mean watching videos. It's about interacting with multimedia, experiencing something. So they could read 2 opposing views about the same issue and then come to class ready to debate. Again, flipped learning is not about video or technology. It's about making the best use of instructional time so students can engage deeply with content. But more on that in just a moment. First, let's talk about students and parents. Now, you may find yourself having to justify flipped learning to students and or parents simply because people get anxious when the role of a teacher changes. I'm sure many of you have had conversations during the global lockdown around how your role has appeared to parents and students. I know many of my friends and colleagues have had parents worrying that learning isn't taking place via online learning. Now, obviously, this isn't true, but people worry whenever there's change. So with that in mind, let's look at some arguments that you can use to support flipped learning. First of all, no more teaching to the middle. Typically, when a teacher plans a lesson, they have to make an educated guess about the knowledge level of the class, since there's usually very little information about what each student really knows or remembers. The problem here is that if the content is too difficult, then most of the students will be lost, and if it's too easy, then most of them will be bored. This results in teachers teaching to the middle of the class and just hoping for the best. This isn't an ideal situation, but it's the best we can do. But by flipping the class and putting the content online, students who are familiar with the material can go through it quickly, while others who aren't as familiar with it can take their time and do additional research in order to understand the concept being explained. Also, in a traditional classroom, the approach is generally time-based. This means that the whole class moves at the same pace. All the students get the same lesson on the same day, and then they all move on to the next topic, regardless of their individual performance or if they have gaps in their knowledge. The flipped classroom is flexible enough to allow the use of a mastery-based model. Now, a mastery-based model acknowledges that not all students are going to understand the material at the same time. Some students might need more time to understand a topic, while at other times, those same students will speed ahead. By giving students as much time as they need on a topic and letting them decide when they're ready to continue, flipped classes can help to ensure that students move forward only when they have shown they can apply what they have learned with confidence. Something else that's important, and this is particularly interesting for teenagers, is that they're able to engage at the right moment. This means that they choose to engage when they're most alert. So for some, this could be early in the morning, for others, late at night. Students can also take the breaks they need without having to worry about missing out or distracting others. Okay, now let's go back and continue looking at how to flip your class. So I mentioned the use of video, just to give an easy to follow example of a flipped lesson. Now let's dig a little deeper. I'm going to have a look at these lesson shapes with you, as these tend to be the three most used normally in most English language classrooms. So we'll have a look at a receptive skills lesson. This is for reading or listening. We'll then look at a productive skills lesson. I'm going to focus here only on speaking, not on writing. You can flip your classroom and do writing, but the process is a little different, a little bit more complicated, and I'm conscious of the time on this webinar. So we'll stick just to speaking there. And finally, we'll look at a text-based presentation, which is just one way of teaching grammar or vocabulary. So, to make sure we're all on the same page, have a look at these stages of a receptive skills lesson. In the chat, could you please put these lesson stages in the right order? So you don't need to write it all out, just put the letters in the order you'd expect to see them in a lesson. So pop those stages into the correct order. I've got my eye on the chat. Now it's not set in stone. There is some wiggle room with the order. Okay, I can see the first answer in. We've got a C, E, A, D, F. Okay, there we are. So we can see slightly different answers coming in. As I said, it's not set in stone. There's some wiggle room. Let's see a couple more answers coming in. Okay, super. So there's the correct, he says, order, C, A, E, D, F, B. Now again, there's some wiggle room. You may choose to pre-teach vocabulary after the gist task or in with the lead-in, wherever it suits the lesson best. That's not too important. It'll be in there somewhere. What's sure is that you would certainly do a detailed task after the gist task, and you would conclude the lesson with a follow-up. Now, in a traditional classroom then, you would expect to go through stages 1 to 5. That would be your classroom time. Stage 6, the follow-up, would take one of two forms. Either it would appear very briefly at the end of the lesson, or that would be set for homework, more or less. So we'd start the lesson with the lead-in, run through to the detailed task, maybe hit follow-up in the lesson, or push that off for homework. So my question for you now is, if that's the traditional way to teach a receptive skills lesson, how would you flip this? So which stages would you put online? Which stages of the lesson would you give the students to self-study? Any ideas? Just again, you can answer just using numbers or letters. I'll try to follow both. So at the moment I've got an A in there, so set context. Ooh, now they're flooding in. I can see 3, 4, and 5, D, E, F. Now I wish I hadn't used letters and numbers. F, E, okay, a mix of responses. Okay, now, again, flipped learning doesn't necessarily have to be completely prescriptive. And so what I'm showing you here is a suggestion, but my suggestion would be this, that stages 3, 4, and 5, those are the ones that you would flip. Those are the ones you'd get the students to self-study. So this would mean taking stage 1 and 2, the lead-in, setting the context, and concluding one lesson with them. So in effect, setting up the homework, for want of a better word. The students would then self-study the vocabulary and complete the gist and detailed tasks. They would do this in the same manner they did in the classroom, the difference being that you're not there monitoring them, you can't be there checking on them. Also, they would most definitely be working alone here. I mean, you could organize for them to do group work for home, but it may be easier, more practical for them to do this alone. When you come back to the class, in the next lesson, you would begin the lesson with checking the answers, making sure the vocabulary was correct, checking the answers to the gist and the detailed tasks, and then spend the rest of that lesson doing the follow-up activities. These would be the more cerebral activities, the more engaging activities, where they're applying the knowledge. So normally in a receptive skills lesson, that follow-up is about personalizing any language that's come out from the reading or the listening, or discussing the theme of that reading or listening. This is the important part. This is where they're really delving into the language and using it, not passively, but using it in however manner you want. So it could be setting up discussions, which can really go on. You don't need to cram them into 4 minutes at the end. Full debates as you wish. And then when you get to that end of that lesson, you could repeat the process through another receptive skills lesson. So there's receptive skills. Let's have a look now at productive skills lesson. And again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, one more time, could you put those stages in the order you would expect to see them? Again, there's some wiggle room, but they're in. I can see Jacques is straight in with DBAEC. Does everyone agree with Jacques? No. Galina doesn't agree. Good. All right. So, again, there's some wiggle room, but I would suggest this kind of staging. So you begin with the lead-in, preparation stage, followed by useful feedback with language involved, then a task, and then again, further feedback. Normally, all of this, it's a speaking lesson, would be done in the classroom. If there were going to be homework here, it would probably be a workbook thing, some kind of gap fill perhaps. So again, if that's my traditional staging for a productive skills lesson, when I flip it, what's going online? So again, you can use the numbers or letters. Oh, you're ahead of me, to tell me what's going online here. So I can see 2 and 3, 3 and 4. Interesting. 3 and 4 again. Lots of 3 and 4. 3 and 4 is popular. ABE, okay. Wonderful. Okay, so again, I'm suggesting 2 and 3. Those are the areas that personally I would flip. So again, that lead-in is done at the end of one lesson. And you could also do a little bit of the preparation if you wished. Personally, I would push that to the self-study and also the useful language. So the students are coming to the next class ready to do the task. And most speaking lessons are not done in a bubble. It's not normally just one student delivering a monologue. Speaking lesson normally involves group work. So it could be, as mentioned before, discussions, role plays, any kind of speaking work where there's a group is much easier to do when you've got the whole lesson ahead of you. They're prepared, they know the language, they're ready to go. You can really spend much longer doing it. Now, some people mentioned also doing the task online and flipping the actual task itself, so doing perhaps 2, 3, and 4. And I agree with that. I would say it depends a lot on the language level of your students and their technical abilities. So if the task is done online, really it needs to be recorded so you can assess it, monitor it, give feedback on it. The advantage of doing that is that it could be added into a learning portfolio. So the students then have a record. This is good for making assessments across the year or showing to colleagues, parents. But remember, whenever you're recording students or they're recording themselves and sending it to you, do be careful of privacy rules. Wherever you are in the world, they tend to be a little bit different. Certainly around Europe now, they're very, very strict. So be very careful if you're asking students to record themselves doing a speaking task. Okay, I have one more for you then. This time it's the task-based presentation. So one more time, this time we've got 6 stages. What's the correct order of them, please? Anyone? What order are you thinking? Starting with a gist task, perhaps? Or controlled practice? And we're going F. Just F? So again, all the stages. There we go. So somebody's in there with F, D, A, C, E, B. Okay. And very quickly, there's some consensus. Lovely. Everyone's on the same page. Good. So there we are. That would be the usual route through a text-based presentation. Lead in, gist task, highlighting language, clarifying language, controlled practice, and freer practice. Again, we would normally run through perhaps all of the stages in one lesson. Controlled practice, we might do 2 or 3 in the classroom. We might also set further controlled practice for the homework. Again, normally taking the form of workbook, perhaps grammar, vocabulary gap fills. Happy with that. So, okay, finally, how would you flip the text-based presentation? Which stages of this lesson would you? What are the students going to self-study? Again, answers in the chat box. So 2 and 3, and 3 and 4. Ooh, that's bold. All. I like it. That's brave. Wow, real mix of answers. So the only number I haven't seen is number 1. Oh, okay, there we are. 1's in there as well. 6 and 1. Excellent. So this time I've seen all the numbers could be self-studied. Arguably, yes. Again, something lovely about flipped learning is it's not prescriptive. You could absolutely do that. But this would be my suggestion. So always finishing one lesson with the lead-in, so preparing the students for what they're going to do at home. And this time, there's a lot to do at home. Gist task, highlighting language, clarifying language, controlled practice. All of those could be flipped. If you are putting 2 and 3 online, then you would also need to provide the student with an answer key. They would need to know what the language is, that highlighting language, in order to be able to then study it. So this time it's not being clarified, but it would be self-study. The controlled practice, as usual, would take the form of workbooks. Now, if anyone is immediately worrying, oh gosh, well, if I give out answer keys, the students are going to cheat. Yes, maybe, but really there's not a lot to cheat at. I mean, in the beginning there, the gist task and highlighting the language, it's just bringing it to the surface. The real meat of the study is that clarification stage, or as it's become, the self-study stage. The controlled practice, that's where the learning is going to take place, the consolidation, and then they come back in to the next lesson, and you wouldn't kick off immediately with the freer practice, but just check learning taking place. So when you would normally ask perhaps some CCQs, some concept check questions, you can absolutely start the lesson like that. If there are any queries, any gaps in knowledge, that would be the chance to fill them. Check the answers to the controlled practice in a similar way. Again, any errors, you can plug them there. And then you have a whole lesson in front of you to really get into that freer practice, because this is where the students are using the language. At this point then, you could have a look at different types of media for the students. So I focused here on more traditional coursebook ideas, so reading, listening mainly. You could, though, as you're getting the students to work online, ask them to use YouTube video. Remember, the stages of a receptive skills lesson will work just the same for a YouTube video as they would a coursebook reading text. So why not take advantage of it? You can engage the students further in this way. They could be watching things they're genuinely interested in. You could also use social media posts for text-based presentations. You would have to curate it perhaps. You may have to cook the text a little bit to make sure the language you want is in there, but they would be working towards using more authentic material, which could arguably make things a lot more interesting for the students and really engage them further. So speaking of engagement then, really when flipped learning is implemented correctly, it does many things, but most of all, it can boost motivation for all the reasons I've mentioned before. It offers greater levels of support, and so because of this, it's generally more effective. Flipped learning makes much greater use of something called active learning. This is backed up with lots of research that suggests people learn best when supported through active work. So we've all had students that have come into class complaining that they had understood concepts when they'd learned them in the classroom, but become confused when trying to apply them at home. So again, thinking back to the text-based presentation, you clarify the language, you CCQ the language, and they're following you, they've got it. Now, you send them home to do the workbook exercise, it's gone, they struggle, they make mistakes. So the flipped classroom means that we, teachers, are available when students need us the most, which is when they're trying to apply their knowledge. In the freer practice now, they come in, we can find out what the holes are, address them, and start using the language. Another challenge that the flipped classroom addresses is that of group work. How many times have we heard our students moan about the difficulties of coordinating in-person meetups with colleagues? Or what about making sure those same meetings were constructive? Moving group work into the classroom setting makes the logistics straightforward. It also allows the teacher to keep an eye on group meetings and to help facilitate them if needed. Student-centered learning, which is obviously a big part of flipped learning, develops learner autonomy and independence by making the students responsible for their own learning. As you can imagine, there's quite a lot of responsibility placed on the students here. But furthermore, student-centered learning better prepares students for life outside of education. It enables lifelong learning and independent problem solving. So that issue again of homework and autonomy. Yes, we are perhaps asking the students to take on quite a lot, but it only seems that way because that's what's not always been done. For me, I think a greater challenge is making sure that the students are reliably and independently studying the materials so that they do actually come to the class prepared. Yes, it can be incentivized by closely tying in classwork to the content that's being delivered online, but it's not foolproof. There will be students who come to class underprepared. Unfortunately, outside of tracking their progress with learning platforms and perhaps sending gentle reminders, there's not much more that can be done to tackle this. I think what's important here is make sure the students know that if they haven't done the work at home, then they aren't going to get the content. When we first move on to flipped learning, make sure they know that you won't be going over the content again. This wastes time. If they're studying it, you're just repeating it. Instead, what you're going to do is teach. Teach. T-E-A-C-H. T, target instruction to address the source of errors and confusion. This is that first lesson back after they've self-studied. E, engage learners in higher level thinking. So discussions of what-if scenarios, problem solving, analyzing a topic, summarizing key ideas. A, assess students' understanding of the most essential points of the topic. C, challenge students with more rigorous examples, problems, and tasks. And finally, H, help students who need it with assistance and more practice. This is a much better use of our time instead of just going over things that they can look up and self-study. We also have young learners, which I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm sure you've all thought about it. With all of this perhaps extra weight on the shoulders of students, does it work for young learners? Well, because of the autonomy that's required, the approach, as I've described it here, generally isn't suitable for young learners. However, if we change what we put online, flipped learning can also make young learner lessons more effective. So I'm going to ask you again to move to the chat. What do you think you can put online for young learners? So I'm suggesting that there is a way to do flipped learning with young learners, but what is it? What is it? What would you put online for young learners? So Monica's in there, videos. What I'm getting definitely not suitable. Bear with me, we'll see. Reading short videos, flashcards, interactive games, more videos. Anyone else? Come on, give me some more. Matching memory activities, okay. Nursery rhymes, puzzles, demos, music. Okay, this is all good. The idea that I have been working with, nobody's come up with it yet. Edutainment activities. This is wonderful stuff in the chat box, and I absolutely agree. You could get all of this online, all of the above. Yes. Okay, so what I had thought, and I had in mind really quite young learners, sort of 6, 7 years old. In that young learner classroom, a lot of time is spent on giving instructions and modeling activities. Now, an enormous amount of time can be saved here if teachers, us, make videos of the instructional material and put that online for the students to watch and understand at home. So it's true that young learners will need some help from a parent or guardian, but it should be no more time consuming than the amount of help that they would normally receive to do a homework task. Furthermore, after a few rounds of this, most learners will become self-sufficient, even as young as 6, because they're only being asked to watch and understand a video of their teacher giving instructions. So this means that when you have them in the classroom, the moment you first model the instructions, give the instructions, they're with you. There's no confusion. Now, flipped learning is more important than ever right now. Due to COVID-19 and associated lockdowns, many teachers have already had to embrace online teaching. What's more, lots of teachers who are going back into the classroom are having to deliver hybrid lessons. This is where half the class is watching at home and the other students are present in the classroom. This makes flipped learning a very natural approach to take. It ensures that all the students are getting the same study material, which they can refer back to at any time. Then in class, the teacher can start lessons by clarifying and answering any questions. And this is much easier for us than having to explain concepts from scratch to a mix of live and virtual students. The rest of the class time can be used for activities that require students to apply their new knowledge. For the students at home, the teacher can make use of breakout rooms on the various platforms that I'm sure everyone here is now overly familiar with. Again, all of this is more easily done with the time saved using flipped learning. I've almost reached my conclusions here, and I'll take some questions in a moment. I can see someone's asked me to repeat the teach mnemonic. I'll get there now, but I do hope that this has made you feel a little more confident about the idea of teaching using flipped learning. It's true that there is a certain amount of effort on the part of the teacher. It's necessary to plan really well in order to create the right tie-ins between online study and class activity. It also requires a change in our teaching approach. Some students will need a lot of help and support, teaching them how to think as well as what to learn. However, I can honestly say, when it's done right, blended learning can lead to a much more enjoyable and effective learning experience for everyone. If you would like to dig deeper into flipped learning, there are two very good books that I would recommend. One is The Differentiated Flipped Classroom. This is a book, obviously, about flipped learning, but it has a particular focus on how to create differentiated activities to support all the learners in your class. That's by Eric Carbar and Christina Dubé. The other book is called Flipped Learning, A Gateway to Student Engagement by Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sims. Again, they go into a lot more detail about the different lesson shapes, how to get them online, activities work best with which age group. Really two very good books if this looks to be something that's going to interest you. Also, if anyone would like to talk to me some more about flipped learning, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There aren't too many Ollie Woods working in ELT, so I'm sure you'll be able to find me easily enough. And then I think on that note, I would like to take some questions. I will first go back and tell you about the mnemonic. I saw some people asking about that. So it was teach, T, meaning target instruction to address the source of their errors and confusion. E, meaning engage learners in higher level thinking. A, which is assess student understanding of the most essential points of the topic. C, challenge students with more rigorous examples. And H, help the students who need it and offer more assistance and practice. Okay, Charlie, did you have any questions?
Hi, Ollie. Thanks for that. That was absolutely superb. Lots of people asking about some more flipped classroom resources, so thanks for recommending those books. Have you got the names and titles on any slides here, or
no, I've got them next to me because I was struggling to remember the authors' names, and I can post them directly in the chat.
Great, yeah, please do that, and that would be a help. But also, I'll highlight that Ollie has done a podcast for us on flipped learning, and the link for this podcast is included in the follow-up email that you'll receive immediately after this session. So As the session ends, you'll get an email, and in that email, there's a link to the podcast that Ollie delivered earlier on this year. So we've had a couple of questions in, Ollie. Some around sort of student motivation and student engagement in flipped learning models. So let's see if we can get some responses on that. The first one: what about students who have poor study skills and would not complete most of the tasks outside of the classroom? This leads to half the class coming in, having completed the tasks, and the other half not having done them. Can you suggest some ways that we could bridge that gap, dealing with those students who have prepared and those who haven't?
Sure. So first of all, there would be two reasons for students not coming to the class prepared. One would be students being students and trying to get away with the bare minimum. If that's the case, I think it's worth really underlining the benefits of coming to class prepared and kind of almost make the students feel a little bit guilty about not coming in prepared, because at the end of the day, if they're not prepared, it's not going to make your lesson any easier. They won't be able to take part in the group work. And these freer practices, they're normally the fun part of the lesson. The other part of that was study skills though. So if you have students that do struggle, then yes, you will need to help them further. So that first book I mentioned, The Differentiated Flipped Classroom, that's a wonderful resource for how to support learners that struggle to study and to internalize new information. But other little things that we can do as teachers is I tend to keep all my classes together on online learning platforms. And then the students I am aware of that struggle, I will send them little gentle reminders. I will try and create slightly differentiated activities as well. So for example, using Quizlet, perhaps on a platform like that with perhaps vocabulary, I'll differentiate it by offering perhaps translations to the weaker learners in the group. But I would say that it's more about making sure you're keeping in touch through a learning platform. I'm not suggesting you text them or email, nothing like that, but through the learning platform, so they know that there's support there, that they know you are keeping an eye on them, that it's not just, okay, all over to you, and they're left to their own devices. It should be very clear that's not the case.
Thank you, Ollie. We've got another question here, sort of looking at special needs and how to deal with that in a flipped classroom mode. So, can the flipped classroom be used in a group where there are students with special educational needs? I've tried it with groups where there are a number of learning paces, but I believe that students with educational needs may not benefit from the flipped model. Am I wrong?
The truth of the matter is that flipped learning won't benefit everyone. It won't. No methodology is one size fits all. That's never going to happen. It'd be wonderful if that were the case. So special needs students or not, there will always be some students that flipped learning doesn't work for. However, depending on the needs of students, flipped learning can really be beneficial because it does allow them that extra support with perhaps say dyslexic students. You can offer materials to them online that are more suitable, that they can spend longer going over and analyzing and working on at their own pace. But yes, it would be just incorrect to think flipped learning is the answer to everything, unfortunately, because I'm a big fan, but even I will occasionally admit defeat and think, okay, it's not working with this group of students, fine, we have to go back. And sometimes I'll try again. We go back to a more traditional model, then I'll throw in the odd flipped lesson here and there, and I'll assess the progress that comes out of it. If it works, I'll try and flip a few more. If I see it going the other way, then I'll scale it back to a more traditional model again. I think with any methodology, it's about being flexible as teachers and finding not what works for us, but what works for our students.
Brilliant, thanks, Ollie. A final question here. We've sort of touched on this, but perhaps we can you can just repeat what it is you said, and that's: do you have can you suggest contingency plans if students don't complete the flipped work, then come to the next lesson with nothing to contribute?
Depends how many students have turned up to your lesson like that. If it's one or two, it's not a bad idea having a cheat sheet to hand to get out to them. But it also depends on what the lesson was. So if they've had to study a grammar point, which then you're expecting them to use, you might be able to get away with giving them a few pieces of useful language that they could immediately use. That would work. If it's something like a reading or a listening, though, and they haven't done it, well, they haven't done it, and there's not a lot you can do at that point. I understand why, if you haven't flipped your classroom before, you can imagine the worst, and 80% of the class are turning up with no work done. But, and maybe this is only anecdotal, I've not had that problem. There's always one or two students that'll come in, but I tend not to get repeat offenders. Generally, most people like being responsible for their own learning when they know they have the support of a teacher there.
Fantastic, thank you, Ollie. That is all we've got time for. But Ollie, thank you so much for putting together the slides and for presenting all of us today. And thank you to all of you attendees, each and every one of you, for taking the time out of your day and joining us in this session, and for being so engaging. Great questions we've got from you all. It's brilliant to see that you all appreciate the session as well. A quick note, certificates will be sent out to you all after the session. The recording for this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and look out for the virtual goodie bag that will be sent to you also, which has a plethora of useful links and helpful resources. And envy that there is a further link in the follow-up email, which is the podcast on flipped learning that Ollie delivered earlier on this year. And from that, you can find our whole library of podcasts for useful topics and helpful resources. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and we do hope to see you at another Pearson English webinar very soon. And thank you again, Ollie. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.